If we're all ready, I think it's 9 o'clock, so we can start our first interim study bill, which is HB 1137, relative to the duty of school boards to provide education. This was voted interim study, I think, by a 12-6 margin. Just for clarification, the members of this subcommittee I had as Cordelli, Hobson, Moffett, Mullen, Tanner, and Hall. Does that sound?
I'm just here.
Yeah, right. You just wouldn't be able to vote on if we have votes. Yeah, right. And then the second one we have at 10:30 is 1664, and I have as the members of that subcommittee Cordelli, Hobson, Bohm, Tanner, and Porter. So the first order, I guess, is 1137, and we're just going to throw it open first to any committee members who had general comments about the bill, and then we could go through. There are a number of different sections and provisions of this. We could go through them one by one just to get a feel for the committee's feeling on whether any of these sections should proceed or not. And Representative, yeah, you've got the, and there's a sign-in sheet and a copy of the bill there as well, if you need that. Yeah, great. Does, yeah, Representative Mullen?
Thank you, Representative Cordelli. I'm just curious, with regards to this bill, I know that you're the prime sponsor on the bill, so you are the apt person to answer this. There are a lot of changes to 189.1 made in this bill, and I'm just wondering if there was an opportunity for the School Boards Association or the School Administrators Association. Did anybody collaborate with you on the language of this bill?
No.
Thank you.
Other general comments? Representative Lakis.
There's one thing I'd love to see added on here, and that is that have it actually in here in place that says the responsibility of the school board, if the town, the people of the town petition appropriately to have a special meeting, that they must have it, as opposed to what a number of towns, including mine, did, and then after we did the petition with all the right signatures and everything, and in spite of the fact that the law says shall, they ignored it and voted to not hold the meeting that we petitioned to have held. So, and there were quite a few others in the state that did the same thing. And so put it here so that it's all laid out for them, so they can't say, well, our lawyers said.
Yeah, I think that is a separate statute, and I think you're correct in that it says shall, but I agree that a number of districts did not agree to adhere to the shall. I'm not sure if it fits in here or it could be strengthened in the existing statute, but it's something to take a look at for next year.
I just figured that since it was all, since we were putting all these things all in one place so that they could see them because they made excuses about it not being their duty, well, if it's in here, it's their duty.
Representative Tanner.
Thank you. Sorry I was late this morning. Fog. I have a couple of questions. One is to Representative Lakis, if I could. What did the lawyer say was the reason that they could circumvent the law?
they basically said, oh, well, then there's this other provision that if they don't do it, we can take them to court. And so basically they were relying on the fact that it costs money to take them to court and that we wouldn't do it. So they were just flat out ignoring the law, assuming that nobody would take them to court.
So what would prevent them from doing the same thing now and forcing you to go to court on it?
Well, nothing. I had wanted another part as well that had some penalties.
My second question is actually more of a request, and that is when I went through the laws in the book that are kind of scattered around. Some of this duplicates what's already in. Some of the new verbiage actually duplicates what's in here. And I was wondering if there was a possibility to have a side-by-side of what is currently in law from maybe our secretary, a side-by-side of what's currently in law and what is being proposed with this new language, because it seems like some of it's conflicting, some of it's the same. I mean, like I said, I was going through it the last couple of days, and just it doesn't seem to be coordinated. And if you want an effort, I think it should be coordinated with the current statutes.
We could see about that. Maybe we'll have the discussion and see if the subcommittee thinks any provision should proceed with a recommendation of legislation for next year, and then take it from there. Since the School Boards Association was mentioned, I was wondering if they would like to come up and offer any general comments.
Thank you, Chairman Cordelli. Good morning, members of the committee. Barra Christina from the School Boards Association. I think I was on the stand, and put it that way, for about an hour when this bill was heard last year, so I really don't have anything new to add to that. I'm just here to sort of listen to the conversation. If there are specific questions, I'm happy to answer those, but I really don't have any specific comment relative to the bill that was interim studied.
My notes indicated that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but your general position was no position on the bill. Is that accurate?
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we did not take a position on this bill last year when I initially testified.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sure there might be questions as we proceed through the list of recommendations in the bill.
I'll be here for the morning, so thank you.
Great. Okay, shall we start down the list of some of the responsibilities for the school board that were in the bill? If everyone has a copy, it starts on my copy as line 16 on the first page with the school board shall be responsible for. If anyone... Maybe, do you have different line numbers?
I do. I have section 2 starting on line 9.
Okay. Maybe I'll get a copy to match yours. So, do you have any comments on that section?
I do. Thank you for asking, Representative Cordelli. First of all, I would like to know, Representative Cordelli, in Roman 2, sort of the introductory paragraph, the language has been changed from establishing structure, accountability, advocacy, or whatever, to approving and overseeing. And I'm wondering why that language, what the deliberation was over the language change. And also in that same paragraph, content was added to the list. And I'm wondering, as Representative Tanner referenced, whether or not content under the responsibilities of approving and overseeing as far as the school board is concerned, why that was added to that section.
Thank you. I thought that, well, approving and overseeing versus establishing first. Establishing means to put in place, basically, to establish these things. But I think that school board responsibilities go beyond just establishing, but they have to manage and oversee as time progresses as well. So that I wanted to be at a future look ahead, that it's not just putting something in place and then moving on. So that's why I added especially the overseeing.
Can I ask just a follow-up to
Sure.
that? Is there any provision anywhere in the law or in any of this legislation for training school board members on approving, overseeing, and whatnot of the responsibilities listed?
I think, and the School Boards Association can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we had testimony from them several times last year about the training that the School Board Association offers to new board members.
Yeah, I'm specifically referencing the addition of content. I'm just wondering what the standard will be for school board members to approve and oversee content in areas that they may not have expertise in. I certainly wouldn't want to be in charge of the chemistry content.
Well, I think school boards should be approving curriculum, whether it be chemistry or history. So, that's the reason for the addition of content. Representative Tanner?
I bet you're glad I'm here. Could you explain to me then the difference between content and curriculum?
I think maybe content goes beyond just curriculum, but policies and so forth. But I certainly see your point, and it could be related to just curriculum.
Just as a follow-up on that, so the state is kind of responsible for setting the standards, and the school board's responsible for setting the curriculum, and then the teacher actually does the content work, and that content can be, and is reviewed on a basis with the building principal and that sort of thing. But that's been my experience as far as the structure of schools and how things are kind of handled down. And as Representative Mullen said, I'd be hard pressed, even as a trained educator and a person that's got a lot of content in my head, to approve content for physics or chemistry or even the field of health with the way things are changing so rapidly. So I would say that I would take the content out of that particular line.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that area? Seeing none, how about if we go to responsibility for curriculum, instructional programs, textbooks, etc. Below that in lines. On line 16 down. Any feelings about having those included as a board responsibility, or the necessity for inclusion of them?
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Representative Cordelli?
Sure.
So when you look at curriculum or textbooks or educational materials or whatever, and we're looking at board approval, is there a uniform process by which a board would grant approval Or is there an option for them to say to the superintendent of schools or the curriculum and instruction people or whatever, just make a recommendation and then we will approve it? Are school board members going to be required to read these textbooks in order to give approval?
My personal thinking is that textbooks should be reviewed by board members for approval, a vote of the board to approve a new textbook. I remember an instance when I was on the school board back in Connecticut, and we had a new history, social studies textbook, and the chapter on the Cold War did not mention President Reagan or the Pope. It was all about Gorbachev, which I thought was misstatement of history. And I remember another instance looking at curriculum for early 20th century America history class. And as a film to illustrate what the early 20th century was like in America, they wanted to show the movie The Godfather, which I objected to, and that was removed. But I think that I think that school board members should review textbooks before the board approves them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how somebody in a K through 12 system is going to, as a school board member, is going to have the wherewithal or the availability of time to read all of the new textbooks. I would assume that this would mean that there would have to be a review of textbooks that are currently being used as well.
That was not my intent. I'm not sure if it's
Yeah, it just says
It's
textbook
textbooks approval,
approvals,
right.
but I
So
don't know
I-
whether or not that means approving the ones that are there now,
I would
or,
not take it as such, but that's my interpretation of. Yes.
So my experience on the other end of the spectrum, being a teacher, is that when things came to the school board, oftentimes they went to the table of contents or they went to the index looking for specific words or phrases that were kind of catchphrases in the current, whether it was the Cold War era or, whatever their particular, their particular ideology or whatever they were there for presented. And at that time, things would come to the school board. The school board would point it out that it was there. And then the textbook or the teacher who was using that textbook would come in and talk about how it was presented and whether it was a balanced presentation or not. So I think that, textbook approval is problematic. Again, I'm not sure that even as a trained educator, I would feel confident in making a decision about textbooks and content area, particularly at the high school level, that I knew little or nothing about, really. So I think that's a little bit vague and needs to be looked at.
Thank you. Any representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting bill to me as a former teacher and a former elected board member. As to Representative Mullins' comment, which I found very interesting, about reading every book, I would probably want to point out that as legislators, I'm not sure that all of us read every single bill before we vote on the bills. And what we do here is we defer to subject experts, in other words, committee recommendations, that type of thing. So, but when there's a particular area or item of particular interest, that's where we would drill down, I think, and certainly have to read. I wouldn't necessarily read every chemistry book. I would just trust that the science department, right. But Representative Cordelli's point about the cohort, something like that would come up. I think everybody on the board should look at that piece of it that is, potentially controversial. But I think deferring to subject experts, whether it's in the legislature or in the school community, I think we have to do that.
Thank you, Representative Moffett. That was exactly my point. Don't we have people in positions with content knowledge that can make recommendations or not? And wouldn't we, Representative Cordelli, what Representative Moffett is referring to, I think school boards have that experience. I think parents come forward with controversial information in their estimation and ask for a review. I'm not sure how this would alleviate that situation, because I think that, you put 5 people in the room and put a problem in front of them, they see 5 different things, right? So I just don't know to what end that would serve.
Thank you. So anything else in relation to A, B, C, and D that anyone wants to mention? Otherwise, yes, Representative Hall.
Mr. Chair, can you just follow up on your Cold War book? I'm just curious. Did that get tossed? What happened to it? I know you said Godfather didn't
Right.
get shown, but what happened to the other one?
board voted to accept the textbook anyway.
And were you the only one that was against it, or was it it's majority vote, right? I mean,
Yes, it was a majority vote. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Would the subcommittee like to express their opinion via vote on some of these individual line items such as textbooks, and as to whether they should be brought forward as future legislation? No. Okay. Would anyone like to proceed in that manner? Right, or would you like to vote as a subcommittee just on the bill itself?
Am I correct that, that's the task today is a up or down?
Right, but I think it's within our purview to say that we think that sections could be brought forward as future legislation.
Okay, I don't mind having that discussion, but I'd like to go through the bill first.
Okay, is that agreeable with everybody then?
May I ask a question? Thank you,
Of course.
Rep. Cordelli. So I guess I don't know how to phrase this, but I'm kind of wondering, the school board is the first line of defense for parents. If parents are questioning materials, they go to the school board. Is that correct? No. If they're questioning materials, what is the opinion of where you go first?
I thought Representative Hall.
I was going to say the teacher. If there's something going on, something material in my class, then I would think that parent would come to me first. And then it could get to the school board after the principal, after the.
Representative Tanner, you
I
comment?
taught sex education, so you can imagine that my job. And noting that it was a very sensitive subject and noting that we needed a lot of parental involvement with that, we actually proactively had sessions where people came in, were able to see the films we were showing in class, were able to actually see the content of the course, because we had no textbook because things changed so rapidly. At that time, if any parent wished to, we had, obviously that was kind of like a focus group. It was open, to anybody that would like to come. But if a parent then objected to any particular part of that, they're allowed to substitute what they feel they want to do, or alternative curriculum, alternative text, that sort of thing. So that's usually the first line of defense. I think unfortunately, I don't know if it was COVID or whatever, but I think unfortunately in this climate right now, a lot of people jump the gun and they go to the public or they go to the school board and scream and yell and protest what they think there. It's much more gentle on the student who becomes the kind of the pawn in the whole deal. It's much more gentle on them and gentle in the whole situation if it's done with the teacher and at the local level and arrangements are made.
Thank you.
I just-
Representative Hobson, you wanted to follow
I
up?
just wanted to follow up, and I wanted to say, I agree with you, Rep. Tanner, that that's probably the best way to go first. But a teacher being transparent is a important piece of that. So I appreciate what you added. Thanks.
Representative Lakis?
I kind of think of the school board as not the first line of defense, but not quite the last line of defense before you get to the DOE, but last line of local defense. But they're the ones who should be responsible. And that's the part of this, is they're the ones that should be responsible or are responsible ultimately for what's taught in the schools. And so they need to approve, I think, the textbooks. Now, whether they do it by saying, okay, who knows about this? What do you think of this textbook? I mean, I certainly would go to more than just the science teacher who's recommending the textbook. There's plenty of resources out there to check out the textbook and say, what do you guys think of this? I mean, you can go online and hear a lot of different things. But ultimately, they're the one that's responsible for the school, for what's taught in the school, for all of that. And how can they do that if they haven't even looked at what's being taught?
Sure.
So I think the comment between Representative Moffett and Representative Mullen before schools are have a hierarchy, just like you said, that the teacher's the first, and teachers try to be transparent, and obviously the longer you teach, the better you get at being transparent. But the hierarchy is the teacher, then and then within that particular school, you have a building principal who also should be involved. And, I always went to the building principal if I thought I had a film that might drum up some controversy. Then the principal actually goes to the superintendent, and at the superintendent's level is the specialist, usually on the curriculum. They're hired by the school board to actually implement and oversee all these things that you're now shoving to the school board. The school board they're not educational experts for the most part. They're not paid exceptionally well. They're like volunteers in the community that are running for office, that all of us are running for office now know how fragile that is. And, to start putting all this on them, as they have to micromanage curriculum, textbooks, blah, 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 blah. If the superintendent is doing their job, if the principals are doing their job, if the teacher's doing their job, then, it would be like Elon Musk going and talking about, the various parts of the rockets that are going to send the people up, the micromanaging the seals and all that stuff. I mean, in a hierarchy, I think you're just throwing a lot up to the top that should be coming through.
Thank you. Representative Hobson?
Sorry to belabor this, but so as a school board member, I felt like parents would come to me and say, did you know about this? Do you know about that? Most oftentimes I didn't, or I didn't have enough knowledge. I couldn't explain it. and as a parent, I got onto the school board because I wanted to have a more investment into what my kids were learning. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to help. So I guess at this point, I don't know what is the school board responsible for? What are we being held responsible for in the community? And I look at it like a go-between between the parents, kind of like what a representative is. You know, it's my job to explain things that are happening in the school. I'm a representative of the community at the school level. So that brings up some confusion for me with you know, your position or the other side, I guess. If you could help me explain.
Would the School Boards Association like to weigh in?
Thank you again, Chairman Cordelli. Trying to think of where I want to start with this. You know, and Representative Hobson, you know, I've heard you the last couple of years, and some of the same concerns and issues, proper school board role. I tend to tell people to start with the Department of Education rules. ED 303.01 is the rule for. I'm sorry, 303.02, duties of school superintendents, and 303.01 is the substantive duties of school boards. And we also have to take a look at RSA 194-C:4. That's the duties of superintendents. And if we look at 194-C:4, it's recruitment, supervision, evaluation of staff, development, review and evaluation of curriculum, coordination and implementation of various curricula, provisions of staff training, compliance with laws, regulations, pupil achievement, assessment through grading and state and national assessment procedures. So currently, if we're talking about sort of the operational aspects of a school board, you know, we say the school board governs the district, and I think you've been to some of our trainings: budget, policy, collective bargaining, evaluate the superintendent, compliance with their right to know law, public information programs, things of that nature. Conversely, the superintendent, when I say the superintendent, obviously some of this is going to be delegated to the administrative team, special ed director, business manager, principals, are more responsible for sort of the day-to-day operations of the school bus. If a school, or excuse me, the school bus, I'm getting on to my first example, the school district. So if a bus is running late and a constituent calls the parent, that's all well and good, but chances are it's going to be the superintendent that's going to be in touch with the curriculum coordinator. If the boiler blows up and there's no heat in that day, I mean, yes, the school board should be informed of that, but it's going to be the superintendent working with the facility guy or the maintenance guy or whoever, the contractor, to come in and get it fixed. So if we look at RSA 194-C:4, the superintendent services, and then look at that in conjunction with Department of Education Rule 302, those are the administrative superintendent responsibilities. And just looking at sort of 302.01, superintendent shall serve as the executive officer of the local school districts within the SAU, be responsible for the overall administration. Such local school district services shall be included, but not limited to the following areas: personnel, finance, curriculum, instruction, assessment. And they put that in the duties of the superintendents in the DOE rules, because as I think I mentioned when I gave my testimony last January, I believe this bill was heard. That's, you know, again, school boards are, and we had some of the conversation here, school board members are not educational experts. We have chemistry teachers, and we have social studies teachers, and we have, you know, things of that nature. I guess the other concern that sort of NHSBA has when we're talking, I don't want to belabor this point either, when we're talking about school boards sort of approving the curriculum and the textbooks, and I think Representative Moffitt, you've certainly touched on this in coordination with Representative Mullen. You'd be asking the school board member to be a content expert in everything that's being taught in that school, from pre-K to AP Calculus, your 12th year of high school. That's a tall task for an average school board member. You know, to the extent, Representative Hobson, when you were on the school board, you get a concern about from a constituent. we would always say at NHSBA, that's great. Listen to the concern, listen to the complaint, but it's not necessarily an individual school board's member job to quote unquote solve the problem, because the law doesn't necessarily give you authority. Directed to the appropriate person is back to the teacher, back to the principal, back to the superintendent. If it's something that, may rise to a board level issue, a hearing of some sort or a review, you're going to non-public session to talk with the parents, that it may get to that point, but initially there's sort of a chain of communication, as I believe somebody over on this side mentioned. So I think that's a long-winded answer to the simple question of who's responsible for what. We have the Department of Education rules that speak to some of these things in coordination with RSA 189-1A, and then the superintendent's responsibility over the educational programming, if you will, in 194C4.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood. The School Board Association position via you would be that curriculum and textbooks would not necessarily be approved by the school board.
Thank you for the question, Chairman Cordelli. I believe my testimony last time said if a school board wants to do that, they can under current law. You don't need the sort of enabling legislation, and enabling language that's in the bill. And I think I also said, some school boards probably are involved in looking at the books and getting reports from the curriculum coordinator and the superintendent, and other school boards aren't. I don't think school boards are precluded from doing that right now under current law.
Thank you. Representative Bowman.
Thank you. I was on the school board also, and we approved curriculum. And we also told the superintendent to get rid of some curriculum.
Right.
I mean, we had an American history book, and I didn't know about it until my granddaughter, who was in the 9th grade at the time, showed it to me. I said, "What?" And it was completely biased. It wasn't, American history should show both two sides and whatnot. Then found written by some Oregon professor, of course. So we got rid of that book the next year. So, we approved curriculum. We had them presented to us. And yet, we didn't have to read the thing. It's just like my Representative Moffett said, we listened to the testimony, right, and that's what we listened
to.
But we can't read everything unless your kid brings it up to you.
Sure.
But we approved all our curriculum.
The other challenge too, just from a sort of an operational standpoint, what I would be concerned about is, curriculum changing every time there's a new school board election, right? That just, they go back and forth. We all know that, and you can't. And curriculum is expensive too. Textbooks are not cheap. The software programs are not cheap, So you have a curriculum you don't like, or the quote unquote new school board doesn't necessarily like the new school board members. All it takes is one vote to flip. You spent $100,000 last year on math books or whatever it might be, and you're gonna switch that up and spend another $100,000 in 2 years because the vote flipped. One person changed sides. So there's just sort of an operational aspect of that too that we should be very, very mindful of as well.
Yeah, this was like every 5 years we do it, and this was 1 year left, so
Right.
it wasn't that much of a deal. And that was the only time that happened.
What I would tell school boards too, to anybody at home that's listening, if you've got questions about this, put it on as an agenda. Say, I want a report from the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, and or the curriculum coordinator if you have one. Talk to the school board about the process that the administration goes through for reviewing and making a presentation or a recommendation to the school board. And there are other ways around that as well too. Some boards may have like a curriculum committee where it's not the full board, but you've got one school board member who sits in with the principals and the superintendent. So there's at least somebody on the board that has a sense that's going back, and then it can come back and report to the full board as well too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we can to the next section, section 3, beginning on line 24, which discusses district policies, conduct of board meetings. Any comments on those? Approval of the budget, et cetera. I think they're pretty, yes.
On that page, certainly we would all like to set as a goal that everyone conform to standards of ethical behavior, whether you're a member of the school board or a member of the public. But how do we define that? That to me is a very sort of vague. My language and someone else's language may be on two different planes.
Right.
And what I consider not conforming to the standards of ethical behavior, somebody else might.
I believe my intent there was many boards have an ethics policy for conduct by board members, so that was the intent there. Anything else on that section?
Section 3?
Yes.
So are we going over on to the next page as well?
Yeah, sure. We can address any of those.
Okay, line 7, public input at multiple times during board meetings. I don't know how a board would accomplish that. I don't know what multiple times means. Does that mean twice? Does it mean 6 times? Is there a time limit? So that would be the next thing that I would question.
Right. And I think we did have legislation that we did pass last year that dealt with that topic. So I think that that's pretty much in statute now.
So are you suggesting that it be struck from here?
Right, that it would not be needed at this point.
All right. Thank you.
Someone could certainly modify what we passed last year to provide some other language there.
Absolutely, the process allows for it.
Yep. Further discussion. I was wondering about the feelings on classroom visitations. This just recommends a policy on classroom visitations, not any specific requirements.
I think that there should be a policy on classroom visitations. If it isn't an open book, like that parents can call in the morning and come into the classroom or just walk into the classroom. I think that's a dangerous situation. You might have a parent who's really agitated from who knows what. Certainly the vast majority of parents are calm and cool and they really like the way things are going, but the small percentage that might come in and really create havoc and be very disruptive. So I think a policy, and I think our school had a policy on school visitations as well as people coming in to talk in our classes, outside things. And I would say that in order for a school to function, that probably is something that happens in most of the school districts. I can't imagine a school district that didn't have a policy of some type.
Thank you. Representative Hall.
I just had a question. Can we just back up to line 9 for a minute? What does that look like? A policy to promote parental engagement. What would that say? And I realize it says student achievement progress, but what is that? I'm just curious what a policy like that looks like.
I believe as drafter of this, the idea was that we needed to encourage parental engagement. It's a fundamental from everyone from the teachers unions to policy people that we need to have parents involved with the school. And so it was just really more a statement that there should be that goal and there should be policies related to that, which could depend on the school. and the school board, what their feelings were and how they wanted to structure how that parental engagement was conducted. We've had legislation numerous times about parental engagement. I remember one bill in particular was just a commission to study engaging parents with non-academic subjects when they were going to be discussed. Mental health was a key consideration there. Unfortunately, that commission was not passed. That legislation for the commission was not passed. But I think parental engagement was a very important topic, and so that was just really a statement as much as anything in there. Yes.
When you were talking about something not needed, et cetera, I thought the intent of this was to lay out in one place so that a school board member could go and look and say, okay, what are my responsibilities? And go through and see what they are. So just because we have a law someplace else that clarifies that, you know, public attend. Sorry. For instance, what that means, I still think it needs to be in here because this is, I see it as the general guide. Am I mistaken in that?
I think that was one of the things I was trying to accomplish, and certainly if there was something else elsewhere in statute, in 194, for instance, you could say in here pursuant to, et cetera.
Yeah, that would be the thing to do. Okay.
Right. Representative Tanner?
And I guess that speaks to my point earlier, that first of all, I'd like to see side by side with the rules of that are currently in the DOE as well as the statute, so that we see it all lined up. Number one, what is currently there, and what is in this particular bill, but also the fact that when we make statutes, then it goes to JLCAR, and the DOE then makes the rules. And it would seem to me that it would be, instead of in statute, what you're talking about should be from the DOE in the rules, combining all the things, giving the direction to the school board, to the superintendent, from what the statutes are. And that then the School Boards Association also would take that as a listing, and I'm sure they, in their training, go through what is the responsibilities and answer questions about the board. But to keep piling more in this book and to put more regulation on just public schools. We're not doing this for charters. We're not doing this for private or any schools that accept our taxpayer money. But for just public schools, I think we need to really file it down and see where it really belongs, whether it belongs in statutes or it belongs in DOE rules.
I would just say that in my way of thinking, there should be nothing in rules that does not refer back to statute. I think it is a problem to have the executive branch developing rules that go beyond statute. Yes.
I, with all due respect, have a different interpretation of the process, and that is that the statute is sort of the overarching umbrella, and then the specifics are in rules. So
Right. But
I think the cumbersomeness of putting job descriptions into statute, and that's really what we're doing, we're putting the job description of a school board member into statute. I mean, where do we go next? Are we then going to put the principal's job into statute, the teacher's job, the state police trooper, the toll booth worker? I don't know where we stop. If my understanding is the RSA states the obvious, that it is the overarching kind of broad definition, and then the fine tuning is done in the rules.
Maybe we could keep on going down the list. Next would be transparency, and there were a number of things listed under that, beginning on line 14 on page 2. Any comments on any of those items? There are 6 of them, I believe. Acceptance of contracts, posting of manifests, posting of curriculum, etc. Representative Moffett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I do want to circle back real quick and just say I agree with Representative Mullen's concerns on the standards of ethical behavior. I flagged the same question with the same point on that. And on the line right above, where it says to allow classroom visitations, that's through. We have a bill I'm involved with. Some of you already are aware of that. The issue of being too prescriptive, I think that was kind of Representative Mullen's point. I share the same concern in terms of being too prescriptive in statute. I think we should be wary of that. Now, the other bill that we're going to deal with later this month on classroom visitations and classroom transparency, that bill does not, I was a prime sponsor, that bill does not prescribe any specific policy or funding. All it does is ask for a report. And the intent of that, as I've gone over many times, is just to get boards locally to talk about or address transparency, recording, classroom visitation policies. So on line 14, just to back up real quick, one more comment on that. The problem I have with the wording of on line 12, section 3, developing and implementing a policy to allow classroom visitations. Now, I'm big on transparency. I think you all know that. And I think classroom visitations should be part of the mix. But the problem with saying that we will implement a policy to allow classroom visitations, now, if that's in statute, I can see some cases where a student has an IEP, or there's some unique circumstances where they would not want, it would not be appropriate for anyone to come in and watch that instruction in a unique case. But if this were to pass as worded, then it would be in statute that by law, the districts would have to allow classroom visitations. So if you're tracking that, that's just my question. I'm just concerned about being overly prescriptive. So on line 14, voting on all contracts, acceptance of gifts and grants, gifts and, a major grant is a major grant, but sometimes in the short term, all kinds of gifts or things come to a school office. And again, if this is law, there have to be a board meeting to accept a gift of a few $100s to improve an athletic field. That's just my concern, is being overly prescriptive if you're tracking that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Cordelli, do you happen to know, in terms of collective bargaining, whether or not requiring that voting on all contracts, being done in public, do you happen to know whether or not that would stand in challenge to any of the collective bargaining procedures that school districts use?
I would think that it would, not doing it, a vote in public, but in a non-public meeting or something like that, would be a violation of 91A.
Right. But it doesn't, I'm not talking about voting on, are we accepting the contract or not? I'm
Okay.
talking about, in collective bargaining, when teacher negotiators and school board negotiators are meeting, are those considered to be public meetings?
I don't believe so. There have been bills put forward, I think, to expand some of those meetings as being public.
Yeah, so I'm just.
But not
Well,
Currently, I
that was
believe-
my understanding. My understanding was that those were not, so when you say voting on all contracts, that's a little nebulous, in terms of if you've got school district negotiators and teacher negotiators sitting around and they say, okay, well, can we all agree on this? Well, how do you feel about that? Let's take a vote on it.
I think this would be a board, we're talking about responsibility to the school board, so this would be a school board vote on a contract.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is that I saw room for interpretation in that
Okay.
language, so that might be problematic.
Thank you. Tanner.
I also see kind of problematic, again, I guess, with the over-prescriptiveness of posting invoices on a regular basis on the district website. Again, we have a business manager, you know, all school districts supervisory units have a business manager. Certainly, the school board has access to these invoices, but to post it on the district website, I just think is overkill, over-prescriptive. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments on any of those? I was wondering about posting of professional development topics, for instance.
Yeah, I really don't see the intent of this. I mean, the school districts now offer their teachers professional development, usually as part of the pre-school year or post-school year. But other times, particularly specialists that deal in, well, like I did in health and physical education or art, music, or special education, we often went to workshops that were not directly sponsored by the school, and I don't know what the intent is of that to have it posted on the district website. What it's part of our professional development and part of our certification.
Okay, thank you. How about the next section, number 6 on line 23, that talks about posting enrollment achievement information or a link to the Department of Education website, which the new iReport facility on the Department of Education has a great wealth of information about schools, school districts, ranging from academics to financial information. Would you see just a school district website just having a link for information to that at the Department of Education website?
I would definitely say a link to the department is really, you know, something that should be there. My biggest complaint, I guess, or comment about that particular thing, that particular statement, is that I really bristle every time we have this per pupil cost, because what happens is that somebody in the district comes in, they have a special ed student that's $100,000, and all of a sudden everybody in the school per pupil cost is like sky high. And it really, that if you are just taking the total budget of the school, dividing it by the total number of pupils and saying that that's the cost per student, that's not an accurate vision of what actually is the cost per student at a school.
Right. I think that if you look at the Department of Education website, there is information on how they calculate per pupil cost, and there are exclusions from that in their calculation.
I know I'm not on this committee, but I was at the one about iReport, and iReport isn't the name of the program, though. That's one of the subcategories, and I can't remember the name of the iPlatform. Okay.
Yeah, you're correct.
Okay.
Platform is the overarching
Yeah.
name of the site.
Yeah.
Underneath that is I report, I
Yeah.
explore, etc.
Yeah, and I agree that definitely should be on every school district's website, because that is an excellent source.
Fascinating the amount of information they're making available there. How about the last section, the requirement of a survey, end of year survey? I will note that I did have an amendment at the end of the discussion on this bill that removed that section, but just throwing that open to see what the subcommittee's thoughts were on an end of year survey of parents.
I would not be in support of it, but what is the intent of that anyway? What do you see as the end game?
We did put in place for a tax credit scholarship program and for education freedom accounts, the requirement for parental surveys.
Does the parental survey and those issues cover all these areas? For the ones we currently do for the EFA and for the education tax credit?
I honestly, I have to go back and look. Representative Lakes?
How can you tell how you're doing if you don't get an evaluation? I mean, whenever I did any kind of training, or when I was in college at the end of classes, we did an evaluation that had a lot of this stuff on it, and that's how you got feedback to know how to get better. And so that would be, to me, the purpose of this is so that the schools know what's going on and know how to get better.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Did they post your survey online?
For some, yes, they did.
Representative Mullen?
Not only am I okay with a parent survey, I know that some school districts already do this. And I would think that it would be equally as important to get this information from the students in the building.
Yes.
Moffett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I agree with Representative Mullen. Again, I think, and maybe not quite in sync with Representative Hall on this, I think parental surveys, I support that. Engagement of parents, involving parents, getting input from parents, I think is important. My only concern is, as with any survey or instrument, who's putting it together? As you all know, I'm sure, some surveys can have leading questions, and they can the questions can invite certain responses for ideological reasons, and so that's my only concern. Parent involvement, yes. The student involvement piece, again, I in theory, it's great to involve the students as well, but some of these students are not that well informed or educated, and I'd be a little nervous about student surveys, but I know some places do that. Some boards have student members, which is different from a student survey. Parents, yes, students in some way. I'm not sure how. Thanks.
Thank you. I would
Just a comment, Representative Moffett, that in my experience, we have had difficulty getting surveys back from parents. So I think it would have to be something that was looked at exceptionally carefully to look at the parent sample size, and whether or not the amount of return would even have the survey be considered to be reliable or valid.
Good point.
just point out that really since this bill was drafted, the Department of Education now does an annual survey called 603 Bright Futures Survey, I think is the title of it, that includes provisions for parents, staff, teachers, and the community for all to answer the survey and complete questions related to their areas, really, including special needs. I remember looking at specifically. So, I'm not sure if that might take the place of requiring school districts to do that individually. But that is something someone could take a look at to see if they feel that might replace a school district survey. So as the time winding down for this bill, I've heard several areas that maybe there could be some agreement that might be the subject of future legislation as a recommendation from the subcommittee. But also, I guess, start out with 1137 itself, if anyone feels that it should be brought back as future legislation, or maybe just components of it. Representative Lakers?
I like the idea of this. Obviously, it sounds like we need a few tweaking and wording and leaving this and that out. But so in our recommendation, in our report that we send forward, should we not have as notes the things we talked about, right? And so I think moving this saying, yes, this should go forward, but these are the things, these are the issues that we think should be fixed, changed, whatever, or kept in, or, whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
And I, Representative Lakos will be surprised to hear this, would go in the other direction and say that straight up, should we go forward with 1137? No, because there are too many unanswered questions with regards to the side-by-side with the Ed 300 rules and what's currently in statute, and some of the areas that we talked about that we think may have gotten covered in other bills last session. So I would say no to 1137, that we would not go forward with this bill. And then certainly it's the chair's purview as to whether or not you include information regarding what potential legislation may come out of the bill.
One that I definitely heard was a link to the Department of Education information system, iPlatform.
Some of these things, I think, again, don't need to be in statute. I think, for example, the link, I think that's something that could come out of DOE, that here's this link and we would like to have this, on all the, I just think a lot of this that we're going over is either already in statute or is something that the DOE needs, if it needs to be all put together in one package, then the DOE needs to do that, whether it's done with a side-by-side. I just, again, feel like we've gone through this. It's over prescriptive. We don't really know how the new legislation fits into it. We don't know really how the rules that are established by the DOE line up with 189, 194, the ones that cover superintendents and school board directions. And if we want it all in one package, it seems to me that the DOE needs to do that. And that some of the things that we agreed on, for example, the survey, that it's just it's something that comes out of the DOE as a suggestion to the school districts and see how that goes. Some school districts maybe, have thousands and thousands and thousands of students, and others have 80, so.
Representative Lakers?
It's my experience, and from what we've seen here, or what I've seen here over the last 4 years, is that there are a lot of things that school districts don't do if you don't put it in statute. And so saying suggestion from the DOE, that, some schools are really good about that, but others, they're not told they have to. It's one more thing, they don't do it. So, and saying, oh, but these are the rules, and so we need to fit what we're doing to the rules. It's the other way around. We say this is what we want to happen, and they write the rules to enact what we say is going to happen. It's not we look at the rules and say, oh, what should we pass? So I think we need to get the horse and the cart in the right order.
My point wasn't that we should look at the rules and then, let them do stuff. It's the series of what our obligations are and what the prescriptions are at different levels. And the fact that we need to if we're going to make a good decision, we need to have good information input, right? Good input to us. And by having some sort of listing of all this material together, rather than try to go piece by piece on the internet and find rule 300 whatever, and not knowing that maybe 300.25 exists someplace else, we need to see it all together. And until we see that all together, there's no way I would vote to say go ahead with this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wonder if maybe it might be useful to the school systems if we at least put a reference in here to the need to survey the families who do not speak English and make some effort to reach out to that subpopulation, which is growing considerably in our communities. And that it at least put it on the list so that it's not overlooked. That's my concern.
Thank you. Representative Lakis?
I guess when I was saying go ahead with this legislation, I wasn't saying this bill the way it is now. I was saying that the intent of this bill, I think we should go ahead with. But if we're going to do that, yeah, we're going to want to look at the side by side, like you said, see what wording needs to be changed. I mean, that's part of what we've been doing here. I've been writing notes all over this about what things, if we do something like this coming year, what things need to be changed. And that was what I was saying needs to go in the notes. So to me, it was not this bill as worded, but this bill as intended with notes, these changes or these recommendations or whatever. That's what I was thinking.
In reference to the discussion about other areas of statute, such as 194C, as was mentioned by Barrett Christina, would you see expansion of the duties section 189 1A to include some of those other areas of RSAs with just for instance, I can't think of a specific, but referring to something and saying pursuant to another section of statute, 194C, et cetera, underneath a expanded duties list. So that, because it goes back to codification of the law, the RSAs, and there is a legislation, I think, to look at recodification of some of this coming next year. But if we're to have a section about duties for the school board, should we combine in this one section other sections, such as from 194C here, with just references to those other areas?
I certainly think that anything that you move forward with should, of course, consider 194C and the ed rules, so that you're not putting language forward that's at cross purposes to each other, so that whatever happens, it's clarifying rather than muddying. So, but I certainly would not be able to say that I would recommend moving forward with anything more general than a clarification of the roles of school boards. You know, because how can we improve anything if we don't see it?
Okay. Quickly?
Yeah, quickly. One of the things that surprised me when I first got elected, first got on the education committee, was that this book is like somebody building a house and just keeps building, you know, little rooms and little nooks and crannies, and none of them are connected. And that's maybe the only, the one overlying thing that I think is important, is that for the clarity for the people that are doing the work in education, and for the clarity for the people that are legislating, we need to have some organization rather than pursuant to this and to pursuant to that and jumping all over in the law book. It's really amazing to me how this whole thing works.
As a general comment as to what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I'm not stating it correctly, but 1137, I'm feeling the subcommittee is saying should not proceed as written. But if there is to be similar legislation that discusses the duties of school boards, it should be including references to the other RSAs as sort of a recodification of the duties of school boards, so that they're all in one place, and that any references here to other areas of statute should be specified, such as references to some duty that might be listed in 194C or other RSAs.
With one elaboration on that, Representative Cordelli, I just think that care needs to be taken to make sure that we're not putting something into statute that works in opposition to what is in ed rules. So I think those ed rules need to be considered somewhere.
Thank you. Representative Moffett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, what you just said, I agree with what you just gave expression to. I also agree with Representative Leck, as I think I understand the intent of this, and I support the overall intent of better defining school board duties and also empowering parents. I think that's part of the intent of this. But this is, to me, that said, this is almost like an omnibus type thing. There are so many pieces to this. And our job, which we're doing, is to look at every piece and brainstorm it and what if it and Murphy's Law it. And one other comment, just to pick out on line 26 about conducting an annual end-of-year parental survey with results to be posted on the district website. I like that idea in principle. The problem I have, though, is that if a district doesn't do that, then they're in violation of the law, and somebody in the district will come to a school board meeting and say to the administrators, you know, you're breaking the law. You didn't do what the law said. And they say, well, we'll try to get to it. And my concern is that if we have all these prescriptive requirements that get ignored all too often already, I think it results in a little bit of disdain for the law. Nothing's going to happen if we don't do this because we don't agree with it anyway. Nobody enforces it. So I'm not sure what the enforcement mechanism would be for districts that don't comply with this law or this requirement. So I just think we need to be careful about what we put in the statute and make sure that it's taken seriously and it's going to actually happen.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think, to follow up on Representative Moffat's comment, I think, there's a whole thing about the consent of the governed, that when you make laws and you make regulations, the more people that you involve and the more parties that you involve in that decision. certainly helps for it to be implemented if everybody agrees that it's a good law and something that they can actually implement and something that's meaningful for them. So I think one of the things we need to look at is, again, one of the reasons I'm on this committee is that as a teacher, as a person involved in education, public education, I was continually distressed by the political influence and the political intrusion into what was happening and the overregulation and underfunding of public schools. And we just keep piling more regulations and more regulations onto public schools. And maybe that's why charter schools kind of broke off, is because they didn't want to be as regulated as public schools. But until you have consent of the governed, so you've got school districts that are overburdened by political policies. They've got overburdened by regulations. They're trying to do a job with kids with limited, in many cases, very limited funds, we're having problems getting teachers now because of our whole situation. And to say, okay, we're going to do a felony conviction on a superintendent if they don't follow the regulations that we think are important. One of the things about this particular bill as it moves forward, or the intent of it, is it should be a commission or a committee, and invite people from the School Boards Association, and invite superintendents, and invite teachers, and maybe even students to come and testify and have input into what they think. I mean, we just can't keep piling stuff on public schools.
Thank you. So a recommendation from this subcommittee to the full committee. Would it be fair to say that we do not support moving 1137 forward as future legislation as written, but we do not object to the idea that the duties of school boards could be better defined in statute, and if there is future legislation to do that, that 189-1A include references to other areas of the RSA that define statutes, so that their 189 would be more a listing with references to other areas of statute, so that they're more centralized in one place.
With regards to Representative Moffat's comments about this being an omnibus bill, and Representative Tanner's brilliance at suggesting a study committee or commission to look at the countless aspects that are in the bill, I think that it's fair to say that 1137 should probably die a respectful death, and that moving forward, any legislation should consider existing statutes, the ed rules, and I would certainly be in support of a study committee or commission looking at the duties of school board members and whether or not they are adequately defined as is.
Could we say that there was, I won't speak for everyone, but unanimous thought that it should not move forward as is, but there could be a better definition in statute of the duties of a school board in a centralized location with respect to other areas of the RSAs, and that some members think that a study committee bill might be a solution moving forward.
I'll speak for myself and
Sure.
say I could live with that.
Okay. Okay, good. Everyone can live with that? And please, when we're in a full committee, if I misstate what I just stated, please correct me.
Do you need a motion on this, Representative Cordelli?
it would probably be a good idea.
All right, I move that we do not move forward with House Bill 1137, and that any future recommendations be brought to the full House Ed Committee.
Well, it would, any future legislation would come to the full House committee anyway.
Right, but with regards to the meeting on the 24th, that we
Oh, yes,
bring
right,
that
no, definitely.
recommendation forth to the full
Yes,
committee.
right, yeah, okay. All right, yeah. Yes, you know, she is. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, everyone in, Representative Moffett,
Discussion?
yes.
Yeah, real quick, I agree with what the chair just said. I agree mostly with what Representative Mullen just said. I just want to, in addition to the notion of a commission or committee or whatever, I do want to just say that we have a filing period in November, those who might still be around. And rather than have which we could do as well, have a commission or committee, whatever, on the totality of school board expectations. But there are a lot of pieces of this that many of us like. For example, just one example, posting all curriculum and competencies on the district website. That largely happens already, doesn't happen everywhere. But if there were an LSR or a bill that simply said something like that, that would be more chewable. What's the word I'm looking for? Digestible than digestible than this. So I just want to make the point that the many good pieces of this, I think some of them could come forward and should come forward after November, but in smaller chunks, so to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so are we all good with that? Okay, great. Thank you very much. And some of us are sticking around for 1164. And I'm sorry. Yeah, 1664. Thank you. And I have as the members of that subcommittee, Cordelli, Hobson, Bohm, Porter, and Tanner. Great. Take 5 minutes. I think we just did. I think we have all our subcommittee members here. Cordelli, Hobson, Bohm, Porter Tanner. So maybe we can get started. I know some people have time constraints. This interim study bill is HB 1664, requiring certain non-public schools or education service providers that accept public funds to perform background checks on all employees and volunteers. This legislation, I think the prime sponsor was Representative Porter. Yes, that's what I was going to ask.
Okay, so thank you for letting me speak to this, Mr. Chair. My concern was, and still remains, the ability of bad actors, and there are some, to figure out a way to infiltrate lessons, schoolrooms, prendapods, that kind of stuff, for not very good reasons. And I know we spent a lot of time dealing with what background checks have to be done and what would constitute not allowing somebody to get their teacher credential. But if I understood correctly from the testimony that we heard during the year, that if someone doesn't have to be certified to do a job, the Department of Education only does those background checks on people who are looking to get teacher credentials. They don't have any authority to do background checks on other people, only those that are getting a credential. I know that when I ran my preschool kindergarten, if a high school kid came down to work with us, which they often did, and they were over a certain age, they had to have a background check because they were coming in. Okay. I didn't take public money when I was there. This really worries me because I have heard some really bad stories, and not saying that there's everybody, but I know you read the papers and it's not just, it's clergy, it's Boy Scout leaders, it's Girl Scout leaders. There seems to be so many places where these people who want to get access to young children infiltrate so that they can do that. And if we're going to be sending money from our tax base to pay for services that someone is providing in their home or in the Prendapod or, after school program somewhere, we need to make sure that we're not allowing those kinds of people to have access to our young people. So I know that there was an issue, and there were several other bills along this line. There were problems with what kind of background check could be done, who had the authority to get the FBI one, and that sort of thing. And that there was a commission that was set up from Representative McGuire had set up, that's a little on this track, not quite. So I'm really hoping that when you consider this bill, you consider that this will be looked into next term. Recommend that something like this will be investigated to assure me when I'm home watching from the video that I'm not going to be starting to hear horror stories of young children being abused because of nobody knew that they were this or that was dealing with them. So
Thank you, Representative Bohm.
Thank you, Representative Padilla. Anyway, the problem with this is homeschool. A group of homeschool students can get together and invite somebody in to speak to them. People are there, the parents are there, or whatever. You're not going to be able to get people to come in and speak if they have to have a criminal background check. And the point is also on private schools altogether. I mean, a lawsuit can put a private school out of business. There are going to be more of a criminal background check than public schools. You can't put a public school out of business. A private school you can. Catholic schools you can put out of business, and insurance companies won't cover you unless you've done a criminal background check on Catholic schools. So this is even less than that. This is inviting somebody in to speak about a different subject to your own homeschool students. So why do they need to have a criminal background check? You're not going to get people to come in and discuss things. So to me, goes way overboard and is part of the do away with EFA. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things that when we ran the preschool kindergarten, we had to get so many credit hours of in-service training every year. And it created a problem when we were had our school only open like so many hours a week. But the Health and Human Services Department in their rules specified that if someone was working 5 hours or less with the children in a week, they didn't have to go through that. So you could have a bill that would say that somebody who's working X number of time with children as a volunteer doesn't need to have the background check. Okay, so I think we could overcome that, Representative. And, I don't think this is against EFAs. This is child protection. This is child protection. We have these rules for public schools for child protection. But if we don't have these rules for other kinds of schools in the state or other kinds of educational opportunities, we're abandoning that. And it's scary to me. It's scary to me. So I'm sure that we could have some kind of adaptions made to make it doable for someone who just comes in for an hour or two or gives a lecture, or comes in for a puppet show or that kind of thing. But if someone's working day in, day out in a small group of children, with a small group of children by themselves, I think we need to make sure that that person is safe to have her own children. And if we're sending them money to do it, we need to make sure that they're safe around children. So it's not against EFA. It really isn't. It's a child safety thing.
Representative Tanner.
Thank you. Well, after working, and Representative Mullen knows this too, after working in the background check realm, it is unbelievable. But there are some things that for example, all camps have to have all their counselors background checked. And camps can get sued and put out of business too, but obviously it was put into statute so that every camp particularly does that. The other thing that I think should be known in this whole realm is that the state actually tried to define volunteer. When would a volunteer, like someone coming into a homeschool school or coming into a classroom, have to get a background check? And the state at that time, the safety issue was that if someone came in on a volunteer basis for a certain amount of time, but also that they had no time alone with students. So the volunteer came in, the speaker came in, and there were other adults in the room, as Representative Baum has described, then that person did not need a background check. And that's already in our statutes as a description of volunteers. What I'm concerned about, and just recently, in my area where now you can get PE credit, mowing grandma's lawn or whatever, but I'm sure some of the people get PE credits for being on soccer teams and doing soccer programs. And we've just had a report come out with horrible news about how some of these private soccer clubs that have been set up and that are particularly for young women and girls, how destructive they are and how there's been quite a bit of abuse, and they're totally unregulated. And one of the things about public schools and even charter schools is that you've got a system of oversight and assessment. You've got, nothing is going to be 99.9% sure. We know that if a background check is done today, tomorrow, who knows what that person might do. What we're trying to do is do the best we can to provide safety for students on a regular basis, whether it's the bus driver, cafeteria worker, the volunteer that comes in that actually spends one-to-one time, unsupervised time with students. Those people need to have background checks so that we have some sort of issue about it. And I think that saying that, well, parents are the oversight, parents are the assessment of when the student does Prenda or when they go on the soccer team or they, whatever these other places that they can get their education. That's fine and good, but parents don't have the time to, nor the ability to do background checks. It's kind of like when I go in to buy meat at the store, I assume that meat is going to be safe. It's been tested. There's government regulations on it that I'm not immediately exposed to, some sort of poisonous meat, rotten meat or something inside it. And when it does happen, and it does happen once in a while, there's government reporting that catches it and then, finds out about it. We know that, for example, St. Paul's had a horrible situation going on, and that, and I'm sure their background checks are like stellar now at this point. But we need to have some sort of checks and balances, and we need to keep kids safe. And there are bad actors out there that see an opportunity, and I think this is needed.
Thank you. I guess I'll comment at this point. I am troubled by the home education provisions in this bill, as referenced by Representative Bohm, and that could be interpreted as requiring a background check to educate your own children. There are very many home education cooperatives where families get together and their children go to a cooperative for lessons on various subjects. Schools now, micro schools, doing that same thing that do background checks. So I think we're going in a very bad direction to include that in any language. We had excellent testimony from Diana Fenton when we first heard this bill about the ongoing efforts of the Department of Education with relation to background checks and their ongoing efforts to expand and define that with volunteers, for instance, as was mentioned. I'm also troubled by us getting involved with non-public schools. I do have an email that I received last year, I think, after we heard this bill, from the superintendent of Catholic schools, David Thibault. And in his email to me, he said, "I can't speak for all non-public schools, but our Catholic schools have to conduct background checks for all personnel, coaches, and volunteers. We have to do this for our safe environment protocols and ministerial conduct policies, first and foremost. Also, insurance companies do require it. And yes, schools who are accredited have to meet standards for these checks as well." So, I think that trying to include non-public schools in provision in statute here for this is wrong. I think that it's already being done. And I don't think that the government needs to put its hand into every pie out there. In terms of private soccer clubs, I don't know if that is something that we want to get involved in here. I know my kids played Little League and had figure skating coaches, and that was our responsibility as parents. We didn't require the Little League coach to have a background check before we allowed our kid to play Little League baseball. So I think that this legislation goes beyond where we should be going, but that we all are concerned with the safety of children. And I think that that is a responsibility in terms of our public and public charter schools, but that it's already being done for non-public schools. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, the soccer clubs aren't getting our tax dollars. Okay. Second, and this is one of the reasons why this is so concerning to me. We hear all the time about the nice things that go on in homeschools, and I have worked with excellent homeschool students when I worked for the Youth Advisory Council. I am not against it, but in my town, we had a situation where the children were removed from school, brought to homeschool, and were being sexually abused by their stepfather. And because there was no way that the school could check on them, and there was no protection for those girls suffered. And finally, one of them escaped. She ran away to the neighbors. The neighbors helped her to get away, and she went to Florida, and she filed a suit against her father and stepfather, and she ended up, he is in jail now. So that makes me really concerned about what happens to children when there's no one checking on them when they're with a bad actor. I can't imagine the life that family of young girls was living, but it couldn't have been very good. And there was no one there for them. There was no one to protect them. That little girl at 14 had to run away to a neighbor to get the help that she needed to escape that situation. I don't want that kind of thing to happen to our young people. And if we're able to say that the private schools are already doing background checks, fantastic. Then this bill won't be an issue for them. But these other opportunities need to be addressed. They can't be ignored. I feel very strongly about it. And Mr. Representative Bowman, it doesn't have anything to do with EFAs. It's got to do with what happened to those little girls in my town. They lived down the road from me. I didn't know what was going on.
Representative Lakers.
Seems to me that was a family issue. And number one, would a background check done on the father or stepfather rather have turned up anything? And number two, are we going to background check every single parent? Because that, yes, they came out of the school, but that was in their home that was happening. And if you want to stop that, you're going to have to background check every parent because it happens in homes all over the place. They say 1 in 4 girls has been sexually abused by a family member. Okay? So I don't see how doing background checks is going to stop that. And number two, these things do happen in public schools too. They definitely do. I mean, I know lots of examples, including my granddaughter's best friend. So the background checks, I don't see, you're looking for something, a miracle to help something that it's not going to help you. It sounds like yes, you want to help them. I want to help them. I want to protect all those kids that get abused by their parents or step-parents or parents' boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever, uncles. but background checks doesn't seem to do it. None of those people fail background checks. I bet you that, I would be willing to bet that father-in-law did not fail or would not fail a background check. And because it's happening in homes, I don't know how we're going to stop that by doing background checks on parents. And a number of these things that are in here that we want them on are places where parents are present, are keeping an eye. And I think they're actually less likely to have problems than the public schools where we're not keeping an eye.
Thank you.
Again, the bill can be adjusted up and down to change things. The main idea here is we need to make sure that people who are working with children are safe to work with children. So however you want to hate this bill or be angry at me because I filed it because you think it's against EFAs, that's not the issue. The issue is we need to make sure we do something to protect children who are working with adults. We need to make sure that the bad actors do not get access through programs that don't require that they be checked before they work with children. So I hope that you will understand the point of view. I hope that someone will file a bill next term that will make sure that anybody that works in small groups with children without another adult for more than so many hours a week has a background check before they are paid by the state dollars. And that, thank you very much for listening.
Representative Mullen?
Representative Cordelli, I swore I was not going to speak on this bill, but I am a co-sponsor of the bill, so hence my seat at the table. I have a question. I am trying to figure out why private schools who are already doing a background check would have trouble or have a problem with a statute that says that they have to conduct a background check. It seems to me like it would be a wash on, if they're already doing it and it becomes part of the statute, I'm not sure why that would be a problem. Whether it's a Catholic school or Dairyfield School or whomever it happens to be in terms of the private school aspect. Second of all, I think that we're getting off track when we talk about some parent having to have a background check to homeschool their own child. I mean, that would not be something that would have been on my list of highlights. What would have been on my list of highlights is the concept of the micro school or the micro program or whatever, where somebody's being dropped off at the library because they're going to be one of 4 kids that is studying with somebody that nobody knows and nobody's mother's in the room. That's the scenario that I am most concerned about. So if we were able to find a way just to target those, in public schools we call them designated volunteers, and they have to have a background check because they're designated to be with kids alone. If there was a way that we could just cover that cohort, I would be very satisfied.
Thank you, Representative Tanner.
I totally agree with Representative Mullen, and as I pointed out before, there is a statute about volunteers that tries to define it and says that if they are spending a significant amount of time alone with children. I also think that I also think that education, what we're overseeing, it has traditionally been one of the safety nets for students, safety nets for food insecurity, safety net for homeless, and safety net for abuse. And that COVID really wrecked a lot of that. That was, that's the Harmony Montgomery one, where you have a child who all of a sudden is schooled and then under COVID just is missing and not taken into account or anything. So I think that what we're looking at is trying to provide some sort of safety net that's connected with education, where if somebody is spending time alone with a student, either online, micro school, public school volunteer, coach. I would kind of think that Little League as an organization probably has some standards on background checks for those people, as well as camps do. I mean, again, I'll bring it back that even camps in New Hampshire have to have all their counselors background checked in order to run the camp legitimate, to get this certification from New Hampshire. So I don't think this is pie in the sky. I think you're right, Representative Electus. We're never going to totally rule out abuse at home. We can't. The government's not going into people's houses and, doing background checks. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is people that are working with students under the guise of education, under the guise of public funding, that are spending time alone with students, either online or in a school of some type, that they should fall under the background check rule.
Representative Bohm?
Can I ask a question? So, in a case of micro educational situation or whatever, who would be responsible if, obviously if a teacher at school or a volunteer at school does something that they're not supposed to, it's the school district that's ultimately responsible. Who would be responsible if, do parents sign a waiver on child safety? I mean, how does that work?
First of all, I think most of the conversation about micro schools is pointed toward Prenda learning pods. And there are two flavors. One flavor is a district pod, where the district sets up the learning pod with Prenda and are in charge of everything and hire the teacher or the Prenda guide, etc. The other is a community pod, where parents get together and work with Prenda and have their choice of Prenda guides to hire. Prenda is under contract to the State Department of Education. Prenda does background checks, on employment background checks on all their guides as part of their hiring process. And let me also mention that I'm very disturbed about any indication that someone might be homeschooling in order to keep their kids at home to cover up or prolong abuse of that child. As a member of the Home Education Advisory Council, I am very concerned about any indications or opinions along those lines. Representative Bone, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just remember, this is an interim study. No matter what we say here, you can still put in the bill. Now, I think this bill goes too far, and some things maybe somebody can come up with language. But interim study, it's a nice way of killing a bill, and that's what this is. Anybody can put in a bill next year, no matter what we say. And we don't know who's going to be on the Education Committee next year. Maybe none of us here. So it's all going to be new information one way or another. So also, I was also on the Home Education Advisory Council some 10 years ago. Anyway, and that time we asked that question. Have there been, to the DOE at the time, have we had any cases for home education due to abuse? And I think it was 5 years, even before that, they had one case from Manchester out of all the thousands of kids that are homeschooled. So it's not an issue. It's no big of an issue than any place else. So I don't believe homeschool kids. I don't know of any cases. I haven't heard of any cases. So I think this bill goes way too far of what's needed. Thank you.
Representative Cordelli, so back to my question about, I was doing everything I could not to use the word Prenda because I didn't want to target anybody as the micro school. If the State Department of Education hires them, and Prenda has already done a background check, then I don't understand why they wouldn't feel that they were complying with a statute that said that they had to have a background check. So
Well, I would say I don't know if we want to put in statute any particular organization that might have a contract.
oh, no, that was my point. That's why I was saying micro schools or whatever.
Right. Yes, Representative
And
Tanner.
I just want to, I know you emphasized that it was employee background checks. This is the other complexity that Representative Mullen and I and Diana Fenton and whoever worked on these background checks, is that there's different levels of background checks. And that for people who spend time alone with children in educational settings, there's a specific background checklist of what has to pop up versus somebody who takes a job at Pony Ford, for example. They do an employment background check. They're more concerned about arson, about, robbery, assault, that kind of things. They really don't get down into some of the weeds that the educational background checks do. So there's there's more than two levels, but just want to point that out.
Representative Porter.
So before I get attacked again as a, saying that I am against homeschooling, I am not against homeschooling, nor do I think, nor do I agree with the implication that you said, Representative, that I thought. It happens. It does happen. And we don't have anybody now who goes and visits the homeschools. All of that regulation is gone. So it can happen, and to hide our heads in the sand saying it only happens a few times is not, to me, enough. But I agree that the bill goes too far to say parents, and I didn't intend for parents to be the ones that had background checks. But if someone comes in and works with a group of children alone, without another adult there for certain periods of time over the course of a week, we need to make sure that they are safe for children. So you can do whatever you want with the bill. I don't really care at this point. But I am, this is important stuff. Do what you want.
Any other? Okay. I think Representative Cornell is not on the subcommittee. No.
No, the ones on the committee that were appointed,
Yep.
and if there's a substitute, they have to be appointed by the chair, and I have appointed no substitutes for this committee.
Right. So we had Cordelli.
Cordelli, Hobson, Bone, Ladd, Myler, Porter, Tanner.
Okay.
Cordelli, Hobson, Bone, Ladd. There's four right there. Myler, Porter, Tanner. There's three right there. There's seven on this.
Okay. Yes.
I just have one more question, if you don't mind. Is there anything that prevents a school district in a homeschool town from calling the parent who might be homeschooling and checking in and saying, hey, how's it going? Is there any? Is that allowed or?
I don't think there's anything in statute about preventing it, but I think that homeschoolers might get a little upset to have the school district just calling up and asking, how you doing? Is everything okay? I think that might be a stretch.
But the superintendent of school has responsibility to know how all children in that district are receiving their education.
Yes.
Under the
I too think that homeschooling, has its purpose and has its place. What I question is, when you said the superintendent is responsible for the education of all children within the district, I was at a recent school board meeting and somebody, either, I can't remember if it was on the board or somebody in the audience, asked the superintendent how many students in his district were homeschooled, and he said, really, I have no idea, because they just have to check in at the very beginning of their homeschooling, and then I don't know if they move, I don't know where they are, so he had he couldn't even come up with a number. He had a rough number, but he couldn't come up with a number.
I think under the legislation we passed last year, and possibly before, if if you do move, you're supposed, and you would originally filed your intent with the local superintendent, you're supposed to let that person know that you are, yeah, right.
How do you
Where's it?
enforce that? How would you enforce it if the family says we're homeschooling our children and at the end of the year they're supposed to say, okay, or we're done, or we're moving, but they move and they don't tell anybody, and that's against the law, but how do you enforce that? Because they've moved to Florida and they don't register that they're homeschooling, or they don't register them in a public school or any kind of school. So those children have just disappeared.
Can't enforce.
Right?
How many people move to Florida and neglect to tell the Board of Elections that they're moving and not deregister from voting here in New Hampshire?
But it's a problem even though with public school students, because as my previous life as a guidance counselor, students wouldn't show up at the beginning of the year and would look for them, and the neighbors would say, oh, they've moved to Florida. We never got a request for records, nobody ever heard from them again, so they disappeared. So we never found out what was happening with those kids. Yes, but these are students that are registered in schools that after that disappear. They're already registered and then they're gone.
Yeah, I don't know if that relates directly to this legislation, but we've had quite a bit of discussion on 1664. Representative Bohm?
I'd like to make a motion that we not recommend this bill for moving forward.
Do I have a second? Okay. Any
Just
further discussion, Representative
yeah,
Bohm?
just
You
to
made the
say, I
motion?
mean, like I said before, interim study actually really means nothing. You can put the bill in again. You can put the bill in differently. And and some other recommendation, thing on this bill, which makes it clearer or less, I might even like. But this bill goes way too far, and that's why. But it's way overboard. Thank you.
Hobson? Okay. Representative Porter?
Yeah, the only, and I agree with you, it's a polite death. But when we say that the bill itself we didn't like, but we do recommend future legislation because the concept itself is important. So that's the difference to me between just saying I don't think we should have a bill on this, or I do think eventually we should have a bill on this. That's how I interpret it.
And this still takes another vote by the whole committee, and that can be brought up then.
Is that if you're looking for why I'm going to not support this bill moving forward, I just tried to write some things down here. Learning pods are allowed under New Hampshire law and consistent with existing home education law to have family members, friends, or someone else supervise children. I'm concerned by doing what we're doing here, we're really going to be impacting homeschooling education in the state, where we have many students being homeschooled in a way that there's consequences which haven't been thought of here in this committee. So I cannot support it moving forward as is right now.
All right. Thank you. Shall we, Representative Lakis, comment?
Actually, a question. Do we require background checks for babysitters? Because they're also spending time and they could be the high school kid, and I just don't know.
I think Representative Porter would say that they're not accepting public funds.
Okay.
That I know of. Okay, shall we take a vote? All those who agree with the motion of not moving forward with this legislation, raise your hand. And those opposed to the motion? 4-2, I see. Great. Well, thank you very much. And I think the full committee meets on the 24th, is it? For our final determination on all the interim study bills.
See you soon.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow there's,
Tomorrow.
When does your food service?
Tomorrow I have, whoops, excuse me, I didn't mean to.